I was clearing snow from the driveway, caught in the middle of a blizzard. I just bought this snowblower a few weeks ago with my Christmas bonus, and it had already become my best tool for the job. The snow kept coming down heavy. The sky was dark and overcast, but I had to get it done. The neighborhood had been buried in snow for days, and I wasn't about to let it stay that way. Then, out of the white, I saw a figure approaching. Cassandra Briggs, the HOA president, walked toward me, her designer coat looking out of place in the storm, her face tight with that familiar look of entitlement. She stepped right up to me. No greeting, just a demand. "Victor, I need to borrow your snowblower for the community." I stopped the machine, pulled down my balaclava, and stared at her. "No, Cassandra. This is my personal equipment, not HOA property." Her face hardened. "You'll be fined for not complying with community regulations," she snapped, her voice dripping with authority. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't just going to refuse her, I was going to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. And my snowblower, it wouldn't just get her driveway clean, it might drag her across the snow if she didn't know when to stop. Cassandra Briggs was the kind of person who didn't just walk into a room, she owned it. Her designer coat and perfectly coiffed hair stood out in the middle of a snowstorm, the kind of look that said she was too good for the rest of us. As the HOA president, she had this air of authority that she seemed to think everyone should bow to. "Victor, I need to borrow your snowblower," she said, without so much as a greeting, her tone sharp and commanding, like she was entitled to it. I raised an eyebrow. "No, Cassandra, this is my equipment, not the HOA's." Her eyes narrowed, lips tightening into a thin line. "It's for the community," she argued, as if that somehow made it her business. "We need to come together in times like this, and your snowblower will be a great help for the neighborhood." I shook my head. "I'm doing my part, helping out neighbors, but my machine stays with me." She didn't like that. "You're not understanding the bigger picture here," Cassandra snapped. "The bylaws say we need to help the community during emergencies. I'll make sure the board hears about your refusal." I could see where this was going. She wasn't asking, she was demanding, and she wasn't used to being told no. After that first encounter with Cassandra, things didn't improve. They got worse. Every day, I'd step outside to find a new notice on my door, each one more ridiculous than the last. The HOA had decided that my driveway was a blight on the neighborhood because my snowblower had left tracks in the snow. As if that wasn't enough, they slapped me with a fine for having unsightly snow piles left on the side of my yard. The snow was everywhere. It was winter. What did they expect? I continued helping the elderly neighbors, clearing their driveways just because it was the right thing to do, not because some HOA president demanded it. Mrs. Patterson, the old lady across the street, could barely walk, and there was no way I was going to let her slip on that ice. That's the difference between real community and the HOA's twisted version of it. I was doing good, actual work, while Cassandra seemed to be doing everything she could to assert control. By now, it was clear to me that she wasn't just about enforcing the rules. She was about making everyone comply. She'd show up at random hours, dictating how long the snow needed to stay off sidewalks, or demanding that neighbors who owned snowblowers let her borrow theirs for the greater good. Of course, none of this applied to her. Her expensive SUV sat buried under piles of snow, unshoveled, and not once did I see her helping out in the neighborhood. But still, she found the time to slap fines on everyone else. I had enough. I'd read the HOA rules when I moved in, and none of them said anything about being forced to share my property with everyone. I wasn't about to back down, but what really annoyed me wasn't just the fines, it was the entitlement that ran through every interaction with her. I could see it in the way she looked at me, like I owed her something. The nerve. A few days later, I got a call from Martin Shaw, one of the quieter HOA members. Martin had always been the type to stay out of trouble, but I could tell something was weighing on him. He had been watching the HOA board's activities closely, and I could tell from the way he spoke that he knew something wasn't right. He had access to the HOA financials, and after my refusal to share the snowblower, he started digging into where all the dues were going. "What do you mean there's something wrong?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Victor, this goes way beyond just the snowblower. I've been looking through the books. Cassandra's been funneling money into some, well, let's just say fake companies. These invoices, they're for services that don't even exist." I was floored. "What are you talking about? Fake companies?" "Mountain View Landscaping, Alpine Snow Removal. They've all received payments from our HOA account for years, but I can't find any trace of them actually existing. No addresses, no phone numbers, nothing. It's like she created these companies out of thin air. I could hardly believe it. But after looking into the documents he sent me, it became clear that Cassandra was using the HOA's funds for her personal benefit. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Was I really being harassed by a crook who was stealing from the community she was supposed to serve? She had pushed me too far already, but now this was personal. I started making plans to take action. I wasn't going to let her use the HOA as her personal piggy bank while pushing people around, but I needed more than just a few documents. I had to have proof that would force the community to see who she really was. The more I looked into Cassandra's activities, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about petty HOA rules. This was a power grab. She was using her position to control the neighborhood and get rich off the HOA's dues. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The fines, the harassment, the way she was manipulating people into giving up their personal property, it all added up to something far worse than I had originally thought. I reached out to Martin again, and we started preparing a plan to expose her. Martin wasn't just a whistleblower. He was also someone who understood the ins and outs of HOA bylaws. He helped me figure out how to legally request a full audit of the HOA's finances. We were going to need everything we could get, from financial documents to contracts and any other paperwork that could prove Cassandra had been embezzling funds. But there was still the issue of how to approach the rest of the community. If I showed up with a bunch of documents and no one backed me up, I'd be labeled the troublemaker, the guy who was making waves for no reason. The truth was, I didn't want to be the guy fighting the HOA. I just wanted to live in peace. But Cassandra wasn't going to let that happen, and the longer I let her do whatever she wanted, the worse it would get. I started talking to other neighbors, warning them about what was really going on. A few were already suspicious of her, but most just didn't care enough to get involved. That was until I started mentioning the missing funds and fake companies. Suddenly, people were interested. Some even started offering to help gather signatures to request a formal audit of the HOA's finances. It was becoming clear. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the fight of the entire neighborhood. And if Cassandra thought she could push me around without consequences, she was about to find out how wrong she was. The pressure was mounting, and Cassandra knew it. As soon as I filed the request for a financial audit of the HOA's funds, I felt a shift in the air. The next day, I received another absurd fine from Cassandra, this time for improper snow removal, even though the snow had barely started to melt. It felt like she was trying to sabotage me at every turn, but I wasn't going to back down. I reached out to the authorities, submitting everything I had gathered about Cassandra's mismanagement of HOA funds. Martin had already uncovered that several companies listed as vendors for the HOA didn't even exist. Mountain View Landscaping? Gone. Alpine Snow Removal Services? No record. I knew that once the authorities started digging, they would uncover everything. I kept preparing. I was careful, methodical. I knew Cassandra would try to discredit me, so I made sure I had everything backed up. Bank statements, emails, invoices, all the proof that Cassandra had been siphoning money from the HOA's reserves. The truth was finally going to come to light, and I wasn't going to let her run the show any longer. Soon enough, Cassandra was feeling the heat. I saw it in the way she carried herself tighter, more defensive, like she was bracing for the inevitable. The longer she ignored the mounting evidence, the more desperate she became. Cassandra called for a special HOA meeting. She was furious. She had to know that I was behind everything, the audit, the complaints, the looming investigation, and now she was coming for me. This was her last shot at saving her position and controlling the narrative. I showed up to the meeting, fully prepared. In my hand was a folder full of evidence that would finally expose Cassandra for what she really was, a fraud. But as I walked into the community center, I knew that Cassandra wouldn't make this easy. She would try to manipulate the situation, twist the facts, and make me out to be the bad guy. The meeting began with Cassandra's usual grandstanding. "We're here to discuss Victor Evans and his refusal to cooperate with the HOA," she said, her voice sharp with authority. "His actions are disruptive and undermine the integrity of this community." I didn't flinch. "Cassandra, we both know what this is really about," I said, standing up. "You've been using your position to manipulate the HOA for your own personal gain. You've been abusing your power, and now you're trying to take my property. It's over." Her face flushed with anger. "You're twisting everything. You've gone too far." "You're right," I said calmly. "I have. And so has the HOA. But I'm not the one breaking the rules here." The room grew silent. Neighbors who had once been on Cassandra's side were now shifting in their seats, exchanging glances. The tide was turning, but there was more to come. I had one more card to play, the snowblower. While Cassandra and the HOA board focused on attacking me, I had quietly made modifications to the snowblower. I didn't just tweak the throttle or the engine, I made sure it would act up when she tried to use it. I knew she'd be the first one to demand it after the meeting, and I wasn't about to make it easy for her. As the meeting dragged on, Cassandra's frustration grew. She kept trying to rally support for a motion to punish me, but it was clear people were no longer listening to her. Finally, she snapped. "We're taking that snowblower, and that's final," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "If you won't help this community, we'll make sure you pay the price." End quote, end quote, end quote. I could barely hold back a grin. "Good luck with that," I replied, watching her storm out of the room. The next morning, Cassandra showed up at my door, her posture rigid, her face red with indignation. "Victor, I'm taking that snowblower. You're forcing my hand." I didn't respond immediately. I just handed her the keys and followed her outside. I watched her struggle to start the machine, her movements stiff and impatient, but when she tried to use it, the snowblower sputtered. It didn't work the way it was supposed to, jerking to the side, lurching forward, and dragging Cassandra several feet across the snow. She stumbled, slipping in the snow, and was yanked off her feet before she finally managed to get a grip on the machine and stop it. The look on her face as she realized what had just happened was priceless. She looked furious, embarrassed, and completely out of control, her perfect facade cracked right there, in front of everyone. It was my turn to control the narrative. The tension in the room was palpable as I entered the HOA meeting. Cassandra was sitting at the head of the table, her eyes narrowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the nervous energy in the room, as if everyone knew something was coming, but no one knew how it would play out. "Victor Evans," Cassandra began, her voice steady but laced with fury. "Your actions have disrupted the peace of this community. We cannot tolerate your blatant disregard for the HOA's rules any longer." I stood up, ready. I wasn't about to let her spin this in her favor. "Cassandra, this is about you and your abuse of power," I said, my voice clear and confident. "You've been siphoning funds from this community for your own benefit, and you've been forcing people to comply with your petty rules, like trying to take my snowblower for your own personal use." The room went silent. People began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, the whispers starting to grow louder. "You have no proof," Cassandra shot back, but her voice wavered. "These are just baseless accusations." I opened my folder and calmly laid out the evidence. "It's not baseless. These are your own financial documents. Here are the invoices for companies that don't exist: Mountain View Landscaping, Alpine Snow Removal, and more. You've been funneling HOA funds to yourself, hiding behind your position. They did not be." Cassandra's face turned pale. She tried to speak, but the words failed her. The community was starting to see her for who she truly was. As the room murmured, Martin Shaw, a fellow HOA member, stood up. He had been quiet until now, but he stepped forward to back me up. "I've been reviewing the HOA's finances," Martin said, his voice steady. "Victor is right. These payments were made to non-existent companies. I even called the supposed vendors, and they've never heard of us." Cassandra tried to interrupt, but her words were no match for the undeniable evidence Martin was presenting. "I have all the documents here," Martin continued, pulling out the bank statements and invoices. "These were fraudulent transactions, and they've been happening for months. The total amount taken is over $60,000. Cassandra's face contorted with frustration and panic, her composure slipping away. "You're lying," she yelled, but the community was no longer buying her story. The whispers had grown into angry mutterings. The evidence was too clear. The truth was inescapable. Cassandra had used her position as HOA president to manipulate the system, steal funds, and create a web of lies. It was all coming apart in front of everyone. The community could no longer ignore what had been revealed. The vote to remove Cassandra was swift. Hands went up one after another, and the overwhelming majority showed their support for her removal. It was clear that her reign was over. "This vote is final," Martin declared, his voice firm. "Cassandra Briggs is removed from the HOA board, effective immediately." Cassandra's face turned a deep shade of red as she stood up, knocking her chair back. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I'll sue all of you. You'll regret this." But no one moved. The community had spoken, and there was no turning back now. Cassandra's lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Cassandra," he said softly, "I think it's time to go." But Cassandra wasn't listening. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you all pay for this," she shouted, her voice cracking with rage. But as she stormed out of the room, I could see the weight of her actions hitting her. She was losing everything. Her downfall had come at last. The weight of the meeting was still heavy in the air when I stepped outside. Cassandra had stormed off, and the tension in the room was finally gone. The atmosphere felt lighter. It was a strange kind of relief, knowing that the community was free from her grasp. As I walked through the neighborhood, I noticed the change in how people treated me. They came up to thank me, some apologizing for not stepping up sooner. Even Deborah, who had been quiet for so long, approached me with a grateful smile. "You did something we couldn't," she said, shaking my hand. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." It was bittersweet. While I felt a sense of pride for what had been accomplished, I couldn't shake the sadness for Cassandra. She destroyed her life by letting her greed and thirst for control take over. But the reality was that her downfall was inevitable, and it was clear to everyone now. The community began to rebuild, not just in terms of physical spaces, but also in spirit. For the first time in a long while, it felt like people actually cared about each other. The oppressive atmosphere of Cassandra's reign was gone, replaced by a sense of unity. The legal fallout came swiftly. Cassandra's lawyer tried to fight back, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Within weeks, she was officially removed from the HOA board. The police investigation into her financial misconduct gained momentum, and it wasn't long before she was charged with embezzlement and fraud. Her plans to fight it in court didn't hold up. As the criminal case proceeded, Cassandra's empire crumbled. Her stolen funds were partially recovered, and the money that had been used for personal gain was redirected back into community projects. The pool was repaired, the playground upgraded, and new green spaces were created. But more important than the repairs was the restoration of the HOA's integrity. With Deborah now in charge, the new board made a commitment to transparency. Monthly financial reports were shared with the community, and residents were encouraged to participate in decision-making. The real change, however, wasn't just in the money or the power dynamics. It was in how the community came together. People started looking out for each other in ways they hadn't before. No one was forced to do it. It wasn't because of any bylaws or fines. It was just the right thing to do. I spent the next few months helping neighbors clear snow, fix fences, and even just chat over the fence. No longer was I worried about the HOA breathing down my neck for every little thing. It felt good freedom, but also a sense of peace. One afternoon, I was helping Mrs. Patterson when her granddaughter Emily came over. She was new to the neighborhood, and we had become friends. "Victor," she said, smiling, "I wanted to thank you. You really taught me what it means to be a good neighbor." It felt like the culmination of everything that had happened. This was the community I had fought for, not one controlled by fear, but one where people genuinely cared about each other. When winter came again, I fired up my snowblower, ready to do the work I had always done. But this time, there was no stress, no expectation. It was just a tool, a simple machine, and I used it because it was the right thing to do. I was helping people, not because I was forced, but because I chose to. And when I finished helping Emily with her driveway, I realized something. The real victory wasn't just about getting rid of Cassandra or reforming the HOA. It was about how the community had changed. We'd all learned something important. Standing up to abuse, even in small ways, can create real change. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can be the most powerful. As I stood there, watching the snow gently fall over the neighborhood, I knew that no matter what happened next, the HOA and this community was no longer the same. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. The moment I realized things were shifting, I knew it wasn't about getting even or making a spectacle. If I had let my emotions take control, things would have ended very differently. The anger, the frustration, it could have led to reckless choices. But it wasn't the vengeance that made the difference. It was sticking to the legal process. Without following the law, I wouldn't have had the upper hand. Standing up for what's right doesn't mean acting out of emotion. Cassandra's abuse of power was personal, but the response needed to be methodical, grounded in the law. It wasn't about rage, it was about using the system to hold people accountable. You can't fix corruption with chaos, only with solid evidence and the right steps. The laws are there for a reason, and when used properly, they help us protect what matters: fairness, integrity, and community. For anyone facing similar battles, my advice is simple: document everything. Keep detailed records of interactions, emails, and meetings. Public filings can tell you a lot about what's happening behind closed doors. And when the situation escalates, Don't hesitate to get legal advice early. Knowing your rights and understanding how to use the system is the best defense against those who would try to take advantage of their position. Communities are strongest when people respect the law and act within its boundaries. An HOA can become an overbearing entity, but when the system is respected, its power is kept in check. Without that balance, it turns from a force for good to something destructive. Our neighborhood is stronger now, and so is my resolve to keep things that way. The peace we've built together won't be taken away, not without a fight